There are moments in Scripture that feel almost too heavy to read, moments where the air itself seems to thin, where every word presses against the heart. This is one of them. Imagine a father, not a distant figure from legend, but a real man with weathered hands and tired eyes, standing at the entrance of his tent in the quiet of early morning. The desert is still, the sun has not yet risen, and in that silence, God speaks. Take your son, your only son, the one you love, Isaac. Not a stranger, not a possession, not a symbol, his son, the child who was born when hope had already died. The child who came after decades of waiting, after prayers whispered beneath endless stars, after laughter of disbelief turned into tears of joy. Isaac was not just a boy, he was the promise. He was the future. He was everything God had said would come. And now, God asks for him. To understand the weight of this moment, we must remember who Abraham is. He is the man who left his homeland without a map, the man who believed God when there was no evidence, the man who stood under the night sky and trusted that his descendants would be as countless as the stars, even when he had none. And when Isaac was finally born, when the impossible became flesh and blood, it seemed the story had reached its joyful climax. But faith is not proven in fulfillment. Faith is proven in surrender. The command was clear: travel to the land of Moriah. Offer Isaac there as a burnt offering on a mountain God would show him. No explanation, no reason given, no visible logic, only obedience or refusal. And what Abraham does next is what makes this story echo across centuries. He rises early the next morning. There is no recorded argument, no dramatic protest, no bargaining like he once did for the cities of Sodom. Just quiet preparation. He saddles the donkey. He cuts the wood. He calls for Isaac. Can you feel the silence between them? 3 days they travel. 3 days of walking with a secret too heavy to speak. 3 days where every step must have felt like walking deeper into darkness. And yet, somewhere within Abraham's heart, something unshakable remains. Because this story is not about cruelty. It is not about loss. It is about the terrifying, breathtaking depth of trust. Before we climb that mountain, before we see what happens on its summit, we must ask ourselves a question. What does it mean to trust God when the promise and the command seem to collide? This is not just the story of a test. This is the story of faith pushed to its absolute edge, where love, obedience, fear, and hope meet on a mountain under an open sky. And what happens there will forever define what it means to believe. The road to Moriah stretched long and silent beneath their feet. For 3 days, Abraham walked beside his son, the wood of the offering resting on the donkey, the knife hidden among the supplies, and a storm hidden inside his chest. The desert wind moved across the hills as if nothing extraordinary was unfolding. But within that father's heart, eternity itself seemed to hang in the balance. Isaac walked beside him, old enough to carry wood, old enough to ask questions, old enough to understand trust. And on the 3rd day, Abraham saw the mountain in the distance. The place, not chosen by Abraham, not selected for convenience, but shown by God. He stopped. He turned to the servants and said words that reveal something extraordinary. Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there. We will worship, and we will come back to you. We will come back. Did Abraham fully understand how? No, Scripture does not record the mechanics of his thoughts. But later reflection tells us he believed that God could even raise the dead. The promise was tied to Isaac, and if God had promised, then somehow, even through death, God would remain faithful. Isaac lifted the wood onto his shoulders. The image is almost unbearable in its simplicity, the son carrying the wood up the mountain where he himself may be offered. Abraham walked behind him, carrying fire and the knife. Step by step. Then Isaac broke the silence. My father? Here I am, my son. The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? It is the question that pierces through the centuries. Where is the lamb? Abraham answered with words that would echo far beyond that mountain. God will provide for himself the lamb. Not a denial, not a deflection, a declaration of trust. When they reached the summit, Abraham built an altar of stones, slowly, deliberately, each stone placed by trembling but obedient hands. He arranged the wood, and then, in a moment Scripture describes with devastating brevity, he bound Isaac and laid him upon the altar. There is no record of struggle, no record of rebellion, only silence. Isaac, the son of promise, lay upon the wood. Abraham, the father of faith, stood above him, and for a breathless moment, heaven itself seemed still. Then Abraham raised the knife, not in rage, not in madness, but in obedience. And at the very instant where faith and loss collided, a voice shattered the silence. Abraham, Abraham. The repetition carried urgency, authority, mercy. Do not lay a hand on the boy. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. The knife lowered, the tension broke, and Abraham lifted his eyes. There, caught in a thicket by its horns, was a ram, not brought by human hands, not arranged by clever planning, provided. Abraham took the ram and offered it instead of his son. In that substitution, something profound was revealed. God did not ultimately desire Isaac's death. He desired Abraham's trust. And when trust was complete, provision appeared. Abraham named that place, "The Lord will provide." On that mountain, faith was not destroyed. It was refined. And then came the reaffirmation of the promise. Because you have done this and have not withheld your son, I will surely bless you. Your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. The promise that began under the stars was now sealed on a mountain. But the story does not end with relief. It ends with revelation. Abraham descended the mountain with Isaac beside him, alive. The promise intact, the covenant strengthened. Yet something had changed forever. Abraham had shown that he trusted God more than the gift God had given. He loved the giver more than the promise. And in that surrender, faith reached its highest expression. This was not blind obedience. It was tested confidence in the character of God. The same God who had given Isaac miraculously could preserve him miraculously. On Moriah, Abraham learned that obedience does not negate promise, it deepens it. And Isaac learned that trust in God sometimes means lying on an altar, believing that provision will come. The mountain became more than geography. It became a symbol, a place where faith was tested, a place where substitution was revealed, a place where God proved himself faithful. And long after Abraham and Isaac walked back down that slope, the echo of that moment continued to speak of surrender, of trust, and of a God who provides at the very edge of human endurance. And so they walked down the mountain together, the same path, the same stones beneath their feet, the same sky above them, but they were not the same. Something invisible had shifted. Not in God, for he had always been faithful, but in Abraham's understanding of who God truly is. On the ascent, Abraham carried the weight of obedience. On the descent, he carried the revelation of provision. Isaac walked beside him, alive, the promise untouched, yet forever marked by what had nearly happened. The mountain of Moriah would never again be just another hill in the wilderness. It had become sacred ground, a place where trust reached its highest point and where heaven intervened at the final breath. Abraham had learned something that cannot be taught through comfort. God may test faith, but he does not abandon it. He may lead us to the edge, but he remains sovereign over the edge. The command that once seemed to contradict the promise had, in the end, revealed the depth of it. God was not undoing his covenant. He was strengthening it. He was shaping a faith that was no longer dependent on visible fulfillment, but anchored entirely in his character. And generations later, people would look back at this moment and see more than a father and a son. They would see a pattern, a beloved son, a mountain, wood carried upward. A father willing to give what he loved most, and a substitute provided. The story on Moriah whispers forward through history. It reminds us that faith is not passive belief, it is active surrender. It is trusting that when everything appears to be slipping away, God is still writing the story. Abraham was never asked to understand fully. He was asked to trust completely. And because he did, his faith became a foundation for nations. But this story does not remain in the past. It confronts us now. What is your Moriah? What promise feels fragile in your hands? What is God asking you to trust him with, even when you cannot see the outcome? Faith does not mean the absence of fear. It means obedience in spite of it. On that mountain, Abraham discovered that God is not a taker of promises. He is the keeper of them. And sometimes, the greatest act of faith is placing what you love most into his hands, believing that whatever happens next will still be under his sovereign care. The Lord will provide. That declaration began as a whisper on a mountain. It remains a truth that echoes across time. And in every generation, those who dare to trust him discover the same thing Abraham did. At the very edge of surrender, God is already there.